All right. Mariners made a trade, and the Mariners have another transaction that's far more interesting than the trade. I guess it's technically not a transaction, but for lack of a better term, we'll call it that. Before we get into all of it, let's thank the good people of Simply Seattle for sponsoring the show, the very best in Seattle sports gear for all of your local sports teams, assuming you're in Seattle. And if you're not in Seattle, you should be a fan of them anyway. The Sounders, the Kraken, the Seahawks, the Mariners, all sorts of great stuff. Huskies, Cougars. You can find it all at Simply Seattle. Once you find all your good stuff, once you're at checkout, use code MOLLYWOP15. I don't know why I tried to put an S in there. MOLLYWOP15. MOLLYWHOP15. It'll take 15% off your order. Thank you so much to the good folks of Simply Seattle. All right. The Mariners traded Tatum Levens, a 8th round pick in 2022, for Blake Hunt. Blake Hunt hit 250, 342, 455. That's a 796 OPS. A guy who is just kind of your prototypical backup prospect, backup catching prospect, a backup prospect, I guess. And they give up a guy who has a little more offensive upside than Hunt, but Hunt is a much better defensive player. Wouldn't shock me at all if this is your backup catcher next year. Tom Murphy, a free agent. I guess it's possible he's back, but I could see Tom Murphy getting a chance to go be a starter somewhere just because the catching market is so depleted. It wouldn't shock me. And the fact that, Tom Murphy's had injury issues as well. We'll talk about him. It's a nice little get for giving up nothing. I wouldn't expect fireworks. It's the type of guy, sometimes you get a backup catcher and you think, oh, well, this guy, I feel confident in him being my starter. I feel confident in him being, if my big dumper goes down, if my big dumper goes down, I can make this guy my starting catcher. Would not feel that way about Blake Hunt. But he's a solid backup. A guy can play on Sundays, that type of thing. Has to show it at the major league level, of course. But I think there's a reason the Mariners were interested in this guy. He has a good approach at the plate, doesn't strike out at all. I believe he had a total of 61 strikeouts in his that's not at all, but he doesn't have huge swing and miss. He takes walks. He's a nice little player. And I think he can be a solid backup backstop to Cal Big Dumper Rally. All right, let's talk about it. So today was the deadline for offering the qualifying offer. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the qualifying offer, I will do my best. Didn't write any of this down to make it as simple as possible. If you offer a player the qualifying offer, if that player goes and signs with another team, you get draft pick compensation. The risk is that you are offering a player, I believe it was $20.2 million this year. It was something along those lines anyway. Maybe even the figure hasn't been out. It doesn't matter. It's right around $20 million. If the player signs it, you have offered him a $20 million contract and he's back with you. I think we saw 7 players today offered it. Shohei Ohtani was definitely offered it. Cody Bellinger was offered it. Matt Chapman was offered it. Blake Snell was offered it. A lot of 7 really good players were offered it. A player who was not offered it was Teoscar Hernandez. I kind of get it. But I also think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake because for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't think Teoscar Hernandez would have signed a 1-year qualifying offer with the Seattle Mariners. It's possible. He was so inconsistent in 2023 that, you can't completely rule it out. You can't just completely say, for sure, Teoscar Hernandez wouldn't have taken that money. But even if he did, this is not a big deal to me. I would like to have Teoscar Hernandez for 1 more year. I'd like Teoscar Hernandez to be my DH. And for 1 year at $20 million, it's perfectly fine. It's a perfectly adequate contract. And even if it wasn't, I don't know. This is probably not the time and place for me to get into. I know I've gotten into it a lot. My whole feeling about how teams seem to think that if you pay a player too much money, the team's going to file for Chapter 11 or something. But I think it's a mistake. I get it from the standpoint of the fact that because Teoscar Hernandez is such a inconsistent player on the wrong side of 30, who had a mediocre year, who was awful in your home park, awful. Maybe you just don't have interest in bringing the guy back. But I think that's a mistake. I think 1 year of Teoscar Hernandez would have been just fine. I wasn't going to be willing to offer him a multi-year deal, and it's not to do with financial stuff. I just have questions about how the skill set is going to age. But I think Teoscar Hernandez as your full-time DH would have been a pretty nice little thing. Even playing some right field, give him 30 or 40 games there. That's fine. And the other thing here is it just makes the organization, again, look kind of cheap. Now, is it possible that the Mariners are closing in on a deal with Teoscar Hernandez for a similar amount of money? And so they decided not to do this? Yeah, it's possible. I'm not betting on it. I don't know. And I don't think this is just complaining for the sake of complaining. It just doesn't really sit right with me. It's not quite as it look, this is not the 54%. This is not something along those lines. But I don't think it's a great look. And I think it's a mistake because I think you could have gained draft pick capital or you could have had Teoscar Hernandez for one more year at a perfectly fair contract. And now I'll be curious to see. Teoscar Hernandez honestly should probably be thrilled by this because I think teams are going to have a lot more interest in him to a 2-year, 3-year deal. Maybe even, okay, maybe he only gets a 1-year bounce back contract. It's going to be a lot more interesting to sign that 1-year bounce back contract when you don't have to give up a draft pick or you don't have teams gaining a draft pick. It's interesting. I think it's a mistake. I think this team makes a lot of good decisions, just like every other team. I think they make some questionable to bad ones. And this is somewhere between questionable and bad for me. Curious what you think. Curious if you would have given him that qualifying offer. I don't think this is slam dunk. Yes, to be fair. I think it leans strongly yes. I think you've seen some reaction from some folks who suggest that they are surprised by who did this. I have already talked to some front office folks who are really surprised that they did this. Kind of, anyway. Like, more along the lines I asked, would you do it? And they said yes. I don't know. It's an interesting one to me. What do you think? Are you excited about Blake Hunt? And what do you think of the decision not to offer Teoscar the qualifying offer? If you have any questions about the Teoscar, how the qualifying offer thing works, I'll do my best to answer them in the comments. It's interesting at the least.